It is written, I believe, therefore I have spoken. With that same spirit of faith, we also believe and therefore speak. We were born in and we speak with that spirit of faith. The seed of that faith was planted in 1961. It took root during the Second Vatican Council, and it continues to grow and flourish today as our diocese and our parishes respond to the call of Christ and the continuing inspiration of His Spirit of faith.
Welcome to the 6-part Catholic Life television documentary, which celebrates the 50th anniversary of the Diocese of Baton Rouge. We invite you to learn more about our local church, from its historical origins dating back to the late 1600s, to its formal inception in July 1961 with the signing of the official papal decree, through its current Golden Jubilee of 2011. Ours is a story of meager beginnings, exciting evolution, and monumental growth. It is a story of divine grace and human inspiration. Quintessentially, it is a story of the dynamic interaction of a faithful, provident God with His responsive, tenacious, resilient people and community, which we proudly and gratefully call church.
The first 10 years of the 2000s represent the beginning of the new millennium. This decade was marked by the globalization of economics, communications, and politics, as the internet allowed people to experience the world without leaving their own homes. The economies of developing countries, such as China and India, saw remarkable growth. The ugliness of terrorism touched all Americans, and most likely, almost all the peoples of the world, as the plumes of smoke from the falling of New York's Twin Towers overtook the skies of our homeland on September 11, 2001. Global conflicts emerged in Afghanistan, Iraq, Israel, Lebanon, and other locations, involving many countries, including our United States. The euro gained more widespread acceptance, but financial crises late in the decade rocked the American economy and spread to markets around the world. Natural disasters took heavy tolls as well, in the form of tsunamis, hurricanes, cyclones, earthquakes, epidemics, and fires. In politics, the election of George W. Bush as President of the United States in 2001 was sharply contested, and in the 2008 election, Barack Obama became America's first African-American president. Americans have found escape from some of the grim realities through the magic of Harry Potter on film, and they have seen temporary stardom come upon the common man as reality television and idol shows produce overnight celebrities. The Diocese of Baton Rouge bid farewell to Bishop Alfred Hughes in 2001, and Robert W. Muench was installed as bishop on March 14, 2002. A graduate of St. Joseph Seminary College in St. Benedict, Louisiana, and raised in New Orleans, Bishop Muench, with his respected theological and educational background, tremendous enthusiasm and zeal, was heartily welcomed by the people of our diocese.
Bishop Muench brings energy to the diocese. He has a great way of interacting with people, making them feel at ease. He relates well to people, especially, obviously, the youth. Again, it comes out of his background, working at Brother Martin High School. He loves the youth. He has instituted the high school reconciliation services for the high school, Catholic high schools in the city. And has been such a success. I have always felt so humbled, so inspired when I go to those reconciliation services. There's one thing about Bishop Muench I really admire is that he has a great insight into people. He is a great judge of character. He has a sense and intuition of how people are and what their personalities are, and that's a great gift for someone who is a bishop, who has to know those things in order to use people's gifts well in the service of the church.
Bishop Muench is a man who is similar to Bishop Ott. He cannot be disliked. He has this great gift of presentation. He has the right words for anything that comes up, a very quick mind. If he catches you in a word that can be turned into a joke about you, he will do that.
Bishop Muench is very extroverted, always the life of the party, always engaging the crowd. That's his gift, and people feed off of his energy. Bishop Muench continues to guide us and shepherd us as a bishop, and is very focused on his people and his priest. Bishop Muench is a fan of our young people, spending a great deal of his time and energy working with confirmation or just being around our high school students, and has put a real emphasis on that in our diocese. You can tell it's one of the things that he enjoys in the life of our priest. He is always working and willing to bring us together to provide unity for our priest in the diocese.
It is very comforting as superintendent to know that I have a bishop who cares deeply and passionately about children and the future of the church, and he spends a lot of his time and his energy and his resources supporting the Catholic schools and supporting our office. So we are very grateful, and it is a true pleasure and a joy to work with Bishop Muench.
Catholic liturgy during this decade was stable, but significant changes were seen on the horizon. Clergy began to prepare for them.
It's been over 40 years since the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy and the Council. The ones who held the original memory of being there, they're leaving us. Those are our pioneers. Truly, the liturgy belongs to the church, and it's the church that has to work out both the heritage of the Council and the heritage that we're making today when it comes to worship. I still believe that the principles that animated the Council dealing with liturgy are just as valid and just as prime and get repeated often in the documents of the Church that we have as regards the third edition of the Roman Missal and the introductions to all the sacraments that we currently have. And so I don't think we've lost in any way that sense of renewal. The hard work of renewal is that you have to keep the fire going, because the renewal is not about a text and it's not about a practice, it's about a people. And if worship is going to make us holy and lead us to God, then that's always going to be evangelizing the folks first, to help them understand why worshiping is important at all and what being in the presence of God does to us.
In the last 10 years, there haven't been a great deal of liturgical changes. Now, in the next few years, we will experience some new changes with the translation for the liturgy. But in the last 10 years, I think the greatest gift of our liturgy is the continual call to our people to be engaged in active participation in the liturgy. There's been a focus and maybe a refocusing on the good that has come out of the Vatican Councils, and in particular the changes to the liturgy since then, a refocus on good, healthy liturgy that is engaging of the community and really inviting them in. I love the liturgy. It's what I enjoy most about my priesthood, is to celebrate the Eucharist and to have an opportunity to be with the people and to pray with the people and to walk with them in their journey of life. It's a challenge at times, because in our world where everybody is getting everything at super fast pace every day of their lives, they come to Mass for this short, brief hour, and in an hour we have to make room for God. And the liturgy, I think, is a wonderful a tool for that. The challenge for all of us today, priest or layperson, as we attend the celebration, to be able to relax and realize, yeah, there are a lot of other things going on today. There are many other things I could be doing, but right now in all of my week, I have this little opportunity to go deeper with God, to be nourished at the table and to be fed by His Word. And what a wonderful gift of our church. What a great opportunity for us as people of faith.
We find ourselves receiving the 3rd edition of the Roman Missal. All kinds of big controversy over that, and rightly so. I think what's being crafted and given to us now has been the fruit of many conversations across the world. Not everybody will like what we get, but I think what we're going to get in terms of our prayer words will be evocative, poetic, will give us an opportunity of expanding our imagination when it comes to imaging God. It will be an invitation to the holy. It can lead us in a better way and a more deeper way to seek to connect what we do in church with what we do in the world. If all that comes about, then I think the liturgical reform is not only alive and well, but immensely successful.
The work done by former bishops continues to bear good fruit in the area of vocations in the Diocese of Baton Rouge.
We've been blessed, as I look back, with native vocations. Men of all ages from our diocese have come forward. And in a remarkable way, we started off with a young presbyterate, a young clergy in Baton Rouge. Some of the guys who have retired recently and are retiring now were young priests then. And I look up to them as my mentors. As I look back over 50 years, being grateful for that native clergy that has come about, in addition to the wonderful guys we've had that have come from other countries, other cultures, it's made a nice mix. The journey of the vocational call in priesthood, religious life, was added to, I think, when the diaconate began. Men now could be called, have that sense of service as a deacon. I think that's been a real blessing to our diocese. We've had good vocation directors, each of them in their own way, their own personality, out of their own context, calling men to priesthood. Another wonderful addition to the vocational effort has been the religious sisters that have worked with the vocation director. Sister Linda Constantine, Sister Diane Hendricks, Sister Lucy Silvio, who've broadened our sense of vocation to the religious life to include women religious. The whole sense of vocation in the last 50 years to priesthood, religious life, and marriage has been strenuously challenged. I think today, maybe not more so than in other times, but at least in my experience, the challenge has come moving people out of a self-centered, I'm going to live my life my way and my way only, to a life of generosity, whether it's to priesthood, religious life, or marriage.
Much of the church's history in the United States, much of the promotion of vocations, the planting of seeds was done by women religious who were teaching in our Catholic schools, and the sisters were very, very good at recognizing leadership ability, recognizing holiness even in their elementary and junior high students, and raising the question, have you ever thought about being a priest? That seed was planted very early by the religious sisters and by the priests, and so young candidates had already begun to think about it and let that possibility just sort of remain in their hearts for a while until they were ready to respond. These days, we don't have quite as many people raising the possibility for young people. The nature of the call has changed in terms of who does the inviting. Ideally, you would want priests to invite since you're calling them to the same vocation. Hopefully, their example is, in a sense, encouraging young men to think about it even without the verbal invitation. Parents and other lay ministers in the church, maybe youth ministers, confirmation leaders, all of these people play a role in suggesting the possibility of religious life. Starting at a little bit older age, you're trying to encourage people to raise the question, to invite others to share in the life. I think as our numbers have diminished somewhat, sometimes we get so busy we forget some of the basics of just sharing the joy of being a priest or being a sister or a brother, sharing that joy and inviting others to consider it. So it's still God who calls, but God calls many times through human instruments, human voices, and that makes God's voice still wonderful, but maybe more accessible. It's not so mysterious that a young person can't begin to discern how to go about answering that call.
Vocations look like they've diminished greatly in the American church. And if you go by numbers, they have. We're aware, I think, that prior to Vatican II was a very big bubble in the American church in terms of vocations. If you look at the 30s and 40s and 50s, and even a little bit before that, there were many, many vocations. But prior to that time, if you look at the 19th century, you might find there were quite a few less. And so what we're comparing to now is maybe the exception. We don't know that. That's why I say history will have to tell this tale. And I do believe God is still calling people. I do believe that for women especially, there are so many opportunities to serve in the church and in the world that before this, you might have had to become a sister practically to do some of the things that you might want to do now. And there are no bounds today.
If you look at some of the older priests, they came up through the minor seminary, that is to say high school seminary. And so they went to seminary for 4 years in high school, and then they went 8 more years in the seminary after that. 4 years of philosophy, getting a college degree, and 4 more years in theology to prepare themselves. So a person might enter the seminary before when they were 12, 13, or 14. Nowadays, it's changing. Quite often you have older seminarians going in. When I was in the seminary in New Orleans, Notre Dame, the average age of those was 31. By going in older, they bring in a variety of different backgrounds. If you're a little older, you're able to make a more informed choice about accepting the call. I went in the seminary the first time when I was 23, and I was considered a late vocation, being that old at age 23. And although I left 2 years before ordination that first time, it was a wonderful experience. I loved it. But when I went the second time, there were such a variety of experiences. That brings a wealth to ministry in parishes, that people have had such diverse backgrounds.
Priests now also have to wear many hats because of the shortage of priests. Myself, for example, I'm Vicar General, theoretically full-time. I say theoretically because it is supposed to be full-time, but logically it's impossible to have 2 full-time jobs. I work here at the diocese, but I also pastor of Christ the King. Obviously, I'm not the only one in that situation. A lot of priests in the diocese are carrying 2 or 3 responsibilities. So that has changed. I have come to appreciate what I call the asceticism of administration. You know, most priests, if you ask, would say, we don't like administration, but we are thrown into it. Because of the shortage of priests and because of the large number of lay people involved in ministry, priests now are asked to take on the role of almost like a conductor of an orchestra. We have to be willing to step back and work in the background, if you will, to enable, to foster, to promote, to encourage lay people to do their ministry. And I call it asceticism of ministry because obviously it is more fulfilling in working one-on-one with people. But sometimes I have to be willing to make the sacrifice of not having that personal fulfillment in order to enable other people to do that. Sometimes it's difficult, but I think more and more priests are going to have to engage in that role.
The challenge with the less number of priests challenges us to be more creative in our ministry. Does the priest need to be the bookkeeper? Does the priest need to do everything? No. Our invitation to our lay people to continue to step up and to continue to take on roles in the administrative that allows the priest to be the sacramental minister that he can only do. So that continued balance, it's a difficulty, but I think it's an exciting time for us as well. Life will be filled with difficulties. Life will be filled with challenges. And the church is not immune to that because we're all human. Yet God can work through it, and God can bring new life, and He does.
We'll take a short break now, and when we return, we'll hear more about vocations today in the Diocese of Baton Rouge.
Roots of Faith, the history of the Diocese of Baton Rouge, written by Lee Loomis and Renee Richard, former archivists of the Diocese of Baton Rouge and original hosts of Roots of Faith. This beautiful coffee table book explores the history of the Catholic faith communities in the Baton Rouge area from the 1700s to the present-day diocese. With more than 150 pages of history, early photographs of area churches and present-day Catholic life, you'll discover the rich heritage and culture not only of the diocese, but the individual unique parishes that contribute to its fabric. To reserve your copy of Roots of Faith, the history of the Diocese of Baton Rouge, please contact your parish church to obtain more information on how to place an order.
Today's seminarians show tremendous enthusiasm and devotion, inspiring great hope for the future of vocations in the church.
I think the greatest challenge is definitely going to be time. The laborers are few right now, and so there has to be a balance, and I'm working on that right now in the seminary. It's always having a balance between, my studies and ministry and, prayer life and social life and everything. We're going to be pulled in so many different directions, but obviously our Lord's going to be there with us the whole time. He's going to give us the grace, and so we really have to be very practical and have a balance so that we won't have a burnout.
The priest is still called, in the words of St. Paul, to be a steward of the mysteries of God, to be a preacher of God's word, not his own, to reach out in pastoral ministry, just the same today as in any times in the past, even though the circumstances in which people live have changed. There's been obvious external changes in the life of the church. We're called to represent Christ. We're called to be as closely united with the Lord Jesus as we possibly can be, so as to act in his name in sacrament, preach in his name, and serve in his name. That doesn't change.
To be a seminarian today is really awesome. We have great formation, and a lot of people are shocked, especially after the scandals. Why are so many guys entering the seminary now? And I think it's because we're all thirsting for something more. And so many of us have a desire to be a saint. And so some people will say, well, that's kind of idealistic, but it's really not, because we're created to be saints. We're created to live in heaven with God. And so we have this desire in our hearts. And in this seminary right now, so many of the guys, we just get together and we pray a lot together, and we're very open with each other about our struggles. We hold each other accountable. And so we're coming to know who we really are in the eyes of Christ. And it's really a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's really a great gift and just a great time to really be formed into the future priests of this diocese right now.
Candidates themselves are in some ways similar to every generation, every age. The last few years we've seen an increase in the devotion of some of our candidates. They're very devout. There's been a return to some of the traditional practices and prayer styles of the church, and young people are very fascinated by the symbolism, by the sacramental signs that are so important to us as Catholics. And so they have that yearning to retrieve some of the beauty of the church in that sense. The Spirit is so wonderful. It moves where it wills, when it wills, and it touches people just in the right way so that they might discover God's presence, and they might discover how that presence is calling them to grow in devotion.
At the time I felt called to be a priest, I was at a retreat. I was 16 years old, and I went to the retreat because after my confirmation, I planned on leaving the church. I was really not into the faith at all. I was totally off. I didn't believe in the church. I got confirmed kind of to please my mother, But that night I was invited to a retreat at the reception. And so I told the young lady who invited me, yeah, I'll go. But I didn't really want to go. Obviously, the Lord, He was pushing me then, because afterwards I tried to find every excuse not to go. I said, I don't have the money. She said, I'll pay. I said, I don't have a ride. She said, I'll drive. You know, every excuse I had, she had a response to it. So right before the retreat started, I said a prayer to our Lord, and I said, look, God, you better make something happen at this Catholic retreat, or else I will leave the church forever. And so the second night of the retreat, Bishop Sam Jacobs exposed the Blessed Sacrament, the Eucharist, the God of the universe, right? And for some reason, growing up, I never knew that the Eucharist was really Jesus Christ. You know, it was just something that we did every Sunday. We had communion, but I didn't know it was really God. But at that moment, when He was exposed, His grace came over me, and I realized, like, that's really Jesus Christ. Like, you're what I've been searching for. You know, I tried to fill this void in my life, this emptiness, through parties or through going to other churches or dating or just many different things. But they were only temporary satisfactions. And this whole time, He was right there in front of me in the Eucharist. And so I was just like, God, what's your will for me? You know, whatever it is I want to do. And that's whenever I felt Him say to me, is to be a priest. After many hours spent before the Blessed Sacrament, He finally gave me the grace to say yes. And it's just been a great journey of really growing in my relationship with the Trinity, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and also just with the people of God. And with really coming to know myself a lot. There's so many holy priests, so many priests who have done so much and sacrificed so much for us. It's just been really an amazing journey so far. And I look forward to hopefully the many years as their brother priest.
At one point, we had 20 seminarians, but as I told people, on one day we lost 5 of them. People look up to me and say, oh, what happened? I said, I ordained them priest. And that was one very, very happy day in my life when, over 3 years ago, we had 5 called to the priesthood. The structure today is different in that there is much more emphasis directly on the personal spiritual and on the pastoral, as well as the academic. But there's much more in the formational area, formation as a human being, as well as a priest and a spiritual leader. Today, when you come out of the seminary, you still have a lot to learn on the scene, but you've been prepared very, very well.
The new millennium holds many graces and challenges for both clergy and laity.
The child protection issues that have been raised, the abuse scandal, without a doubt, has been a part of the last 10 years. We can't hide from that. We have to meet that head on, and our church has done a great deal in the Child Protection Office that's been created and in the work with our ministers, our priests, and our people to educate on the signs of the abuse, but to also help educate our young people and our children so that we work to ensure the safety and the protection of our children. It's a challenge for us today. Some people would say, well, the church should just not minister to young people. That's the safe bet. We can protect ourselves if we just don't do it. But I'm pretty sure in the scripture again and again, Jesus was the one that said, let the children come to me. And how often do we see that image in pictures and in icons? And so we don't stop ministering to our young people, but we make sure we do it safely for them and for our clergy and for our ministers.
Jesus could not have made it clearer that we have an obligation to all neighbors, but we have a special obligation to young people, to children, to youth, to adolescents. And Jesus calls us as His people to serve our young people with love, with care, with outreach, and with respect and integrity. Measures that we have taken in our diocese and other dioceses at the national level, at the international level, and here at the local level for years before and now establish those requirements. We have an obligation to serve and to care for our young people, to protect them, to assist them, to guide them. And Jesus expects and requires that of us.
Sadly, the specter of abuse of children is an immense problem for society as a whole. Here in Louisiana, because of events that took place in the early 80s in the Diocese of Lafayette, we became sensitive to the difficulties that this could pose for a diocese way back then. In the 1980s, we developed policies to deal with that. I remember Bishop Ott being very firm that if this was something you did, you were now disqualified for ministry permanently, period. He had a marvelous way of being able to say so kindly, but emphatically, to priests, deacons, seminarians, lay ministers, and what a reassurance to parents. We developed formal policies to make sure that we investigated carefully, because you'd hate to make a mistake and tar and feather somebody's reputation on flimsy or no evidence. And sometimes it is almost impossible to investigate without requiring someone to step away from ministry for a while we make sure. But we had policies like that in place long before this became a national problem or an international one. I say that not to pat ourselves on the back, but to affirm how seriously we have always taken that commitment. A child's integrity, a child's innocence, a child's purity, these are far more important than any adult's career. Now that being said, because it has become a problem nationally and internationally, our diocese has simply tried to keep up with and insist upon providing a safe environment for all of our young people, educating our employees and volunteers, and yes, that includes the clergy, into how we can make our church and our society more safe.
The Child Protection Office helps us to become more sensitive to the issues of boundaries, to the need to become more transparent in the administrative work of the diocese, as well as to take more seriously our responsibility to care for the children that are entrusted to us.
After a short break, we'll be back to explore how Catholic education works to spread the faith in today's difficult world.
Roots of Faith, the history of the Diocese of Baton Rouge, written by Lee Loomis and Renee Richard, former archivists of the Diocese of Baton Rouge and original hosts of Roots of Faith. This beautiful coffee table book explores the history of the Catholic faith communities in the Baton Rouge area from the 1700s to the present-day diocese. With more than 150 pages of history, early photographs of area churches and present-day Catholic life, you'll discover the rich heritage and culture not only of the diocese, but the individual unique parishes that contribute to its fabric. To reserve your copy of Roots of Faith, the history of the Diocese of Baton Rouge, please contact your parish church to obtain more information on how to place an order.
Emphasis on Catholic education continues, though not without some changes necessitated and enabled by emerging technologies.
The role of superintendent certainly has changed over the years. When the diocese was founded 50 years ago, many of our schools were staffed by religious. And the wonderful part of the religious gift that we had was that there was a Mother Superior, or there was a Superior General, or some person in the religious orders who brought a lot of their leaders together. So they would collaborate across diocesan boundaries, they would collaborate across the country and talk about how to be more effective in their schools. Well, once the religious were not the primary people on the front lines in our schools, the need became even greater for us to have a central office to work with our laity and our school leaders so that they would share best practice and do a better job in service. Things certainly have changed in Catholic education as we stepped forward and became more academic. We became more linked with government programs, with the greater community. You know, we serve quite a few non-Catholics in our schools also. And so as we've grown and expanded and gotten better at our skill and our craft as educators, the need for central office has been greater so that we can share the best practice with each other.
The contributions of the Catholic schools, the Diocese of Baton Rouge, and this entire community or communities that they serve has been tremendous, providing not only spiritual leaders, but also civic leaders to lead our communities, lawyers, doctors, you know, in every aspect. The products of Catholic schools have been leaders in their communities. 50 years ago, the religious education was primarily the religious. There might have been one or two lay people in each of the schools. The religion was totally left up to religious, and that was well done. Today, that's predominantly done by the lay people. 50 years ago, I'm not sure if the word computer was even in the Webster's dictionary, so our vocabulary has changed, the way we teach has changed. I never thought we'd get away from the old-fashioned chalkboard and erasers, but today it's smart boards, and so technology is the wave of the future. We need to prepare our children for the world that they're going to face.
We would like to be able to open our doors to Catholic schools to anyone who's interested in that formation and that education for their child. So to do that, we truly need to come together as a community, and we need to address the economic issues that are involved in the future of our schools. The second challenge for us is the fact that we are countercultural to modern society. And we want our students to be able to live in society, but we want them to have the faith, the formation, the discernment process that will make them good citizens and good members of our church.
Youth ministry remains vibrant as it adapts to changes in today's society.
From 1961 to 1985, we had priests appointed to be over youth ministry. There was no official youth ministry office. They just kind of ran it the same way that they do some other apostolates and things like that now. And then in 1985, Bishop Ott actually established an office of youth ministry and hired the first full-time director of youth ministry. So we have 2.5 lay ministers in that office now. The youth ministry has changed incredibly since it first began in 1961 here in our diocese. It went from a lot of retreats and diocesan program to really being now more a parish-based ministry. We still offer a lot of direct ministries to the young people in the diocese, but we really focus on parish ministries and helping them to grow youth ministry at the parish level now. Each of our different parishes in our diocese, they do their youth ministry in different ways. We have 8 components of youth ministry that we try to cover as outlined in Renewing the Vision by our bishops. And so they have different programming offered for young people to help meet the different needs. Our parishes just have so many opportunities for young people, and they really are creative in finding ways to meet the individual needs of their parishioners.
We have a holistic approach to youth ministry now. We look at the different ministries that young people are able to encounter Christ in, whether it's through participating in Mass as a lector or an usher or in the choir, altar service, just different ways that they can encounter the love of Christ. Then there's also the youth group forum where you go and you meet together and you pray together, you hang out, you experience Christ in the community. A big focus I found is on Eucharistic adoration in youth ministry. That's how I felt the call. A lot of my brother seminarians have felt the call that way. And then a lot of kids have just encountered Christ that way. When you're in the presence of truth, when you're in truth is a person, Jesus Christ, your heart is changed. And the focus is really on Jesus.
When you reach out to young people and involve them, you can hand them the responsibility and be surprised how well they handle it. What this generation of young people has to give is absolutely amazing, both within and beyond the church. And they're very responsive, and they're very generous. And we have found that with those who serve as peer ministers, youth peer ministers to one another, oftentimes that is an instrument of them thinking about becoming a religious sister or brother or a priest because they enjoy the service. And I had one of them say to me one time, "You mean you can do this and be paid for it?" I said, "How about that?"
In our diocese in particular, our youth office has always been on the forefront of what's happening on the national scene, which is a huge testament to the men and women that have worked with our youth for years now. We hold an annual youth conference that gathers our young people together. We hold our Dawson World Youth Day, again a walking tour of a part of our diocese for prayer and gathering and fellowship. But on many levels, our parishes have hired youth ministers and made that position important. So there's been a real focus and a lot of resources dedicated to our young people because we realize that without them, where are we? They are the future, but they are the today.
I see several challenges for youth ministry in our diocese in the near future and also in the distant future. We definitely need to be more creative in how we reach out to young people. Their culture is changing, society is changing, and we need to adapt to how we reach out to them. Youth ministry for a long time has been about reaching out to teenagers and programming for teenagers. But real good youth ministry in the future is going to have to be family-oriented. We've got to get parents involved. We need to do a better job of reaching out to parents and equipping them as part of our youth ministry efforts. I see that as a big challenge for the future, but I also see it as an incredible grace, the opportunity to become a church that reaches out to family and not separating kids from parents, but bringing them together. We have to integrate youth ministry and religious education. They need to go hand in hand. We can't be separate anymore.
Quickly evolving technologies provide ongoing new opportunities in today's world.
In the 60s, when the newspaper was established, was still at a time when hot press was being used. It was actually lead type that was put together to form words. And once the type was set, then you had to proof it, and it would come in galleys on newsprint, and you would have to edit that. Everything now is done electronically. When I came to the diocese, we had a darkroom. We actually processed our own film, did our own printing. Now everything is digital cameras. The technology has just made a tremendous difference. We're able to communicate with people so much easier now through internet and follow up on stories, have information much quicker than we used to. It's also a lot cleaner. We don't have all those messy galleys that we had to fool with, which had ink all over them. Once the pages are finished, we email them to the printer. We do still now go and check page proofs, which is kind of an old tradition within newspaper people. Before it actually gets mailed, we want to see the final product and make sure that everything is as it's supposed to be.
One thing that Bishop Tracy did, which was really cool, he would go out from the council while it was still going on, and he would communicate to the faithful through magazine publications, through the commentators, what was going on. He was evangelizing through media. Baton Rouge, it's really funny, we say we're a Vatican II diocese, but it's true, because you know what? We're still doing that today. We are still going beyond the borders of the church to communicate the faith to everyone, especially through Catholic Life TV, through the commentators still. And we're being communicators of the faith of the 21st century. And that's really what Vatican II is calling us to. It's really communicating this faith, communicating the gospel message of Jesus Christ to a broken world. We're communicating it through publications and through the media. Because, let's be honest, not everybody goes to church. But if they turn the channel on TV, they may see something, and they may experience Christ through that. That's what Bishop Tracy was trying to do. He wanted anyone who saw this publication to experience the love of God, to experience the movements of the Holy Spirit that otherwise they may not have been able to experience if he had not been so forward-thinking in his ministry.
One of the biggest changes for a parish priest is our cell phones. When I was ordained, quite often you would have a beeper. And if you didn't have the beeper on, if you turned it off because you'd gone in a hospital and forgot to turn it on again, you lost the call. You never knew that somebody called. When cell phones came, you had the ability to be able to, first of all, never to miss a call, even if you didn't take it at the time, but the ability to respond quickly to a situation. If I were leaving the hospital and called back to the office on my cell phone, And they said someone just called from this other hospital. It was easy to go immediately there instead of driving back to the parish, driving back into town. So cell phones have, of course, they drive us crazy in church. I often jokingly say, if your cell phone rings at church, it's a venial sin. If you answer, it's a mortal sin. The internet has made an extraordinary difference. You can Google just about any topic of church history or church practice. To have a website where the ministers can check what Mass they're supposed to be serving. People can check about changes in times where in Catholic schools, you can chat with the students, teachers, and see what homework they really got. It's made an extraordinary difference.
I think one of the big changes new technology gives us here in the diocese is the use of like parish websites. People have just gotten so used to using the computer and using the internet. Parishes will be posting the bulletin on the website, homilies will be on the website, even daily information, the daily readings.
Social networking tools are a good resource. They're for the most part free, and churches should use them because they're a great way to communicate with people. However, there have been some issues with what's an appropriate use of them. The papacy wants the churches to use these things, and that's where this has come from. So this document clarifies what we can say is okay. Most of what the TV station does uses technology. We also have helped them set up a website. On that website, we broadcast the TV station now so that you can watch it online if you're outside of the viewing area. Also, they have a direct connection between the cathedral and the TV station at the central offices so that they can do the live broadcast of the Mass. That's been a great innovation. And everything that they do as far as cutting and prepping the shows, they're using computers to do all of those things with some pretty advanced software.
A more recent and significant development in our diocesan history has been the establishment of Catholic Life Television, Baton Rouge Cox Cable Channel 15, which began 24-hour broadcasting in June 2001. Affiliated with Catholic television operated out of the Archdiocese of Boston, several locally produced and popular series have aired over the years. Beginning in 2006 and expanded in 2009, a contract with Charter Communications allowed the lease of fiber optic cable to provide limited programming in the New Roads, Hammond, and St. James facilities. In the fall of 2008, regular live broadcast of the Sunday 10 o'clock a.m. Mass from St. Joseph Cathedral began with taped rebroadcasts. Additionally, coverage of the ordination rites of diaconate and priesthood, some of which have received national awards, the rite of election and Holy Week services, including the Chrism Mass, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter Vigil, as well as Tuesday and Thursday Masses are also covered either live and/or taped. It is literally impossible to calculate the impact of these broadcasts locally and regionally for the Catholic family as well as for the general audience. What a gift for the evangelization of so many who appreciate receiving these presentations.
We'll take a short break now, and when we return, we'll discuss how the Catholic Church reaches out into the wider community to minister to our most vulnerable populations.
Roots of Faith, the history of the Diocese of Baton Rouge, written by Lee Loomis and Renee Richard, former archivists of the Diocese of Baton Rouge and original hosts of Roots of Faith. This beautiful coffee table book explores the history of the Catholic faith communities in the Baton Rouge area from the 1700s to the present-day diocese. With more than 150 pages of history, early photographs of area churches and present-day Catholic life, you'll discover the rich heritage and culture not only of the diocese, but the individual unique parishes that contribute to its fabric. To reserve your copy of Roots of Faith, the history of the Diocese of Baton Rouge, please contact your parish church to obtain more information on how to place an order.
Community can be measured by a lot of things. It can be measured by the economy, the number of jobs, the number of businesses, how education is doing. We believe at St. Vincent de Paul that a community is measured on how it takes care of its most poor and vulnerable. What about prayer? Where does that fit in with the society? It is our core. It's our foundation. Prayers are answered. We see that every day at St. Vincent de Paul.
Our mission is really seen in Matthew 25. I was hungry and you fed me. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And you know, part of our mission too is giving people an opportunity to serve those in need. So you see the face of Jesus in the people in need. You know, we try every day to find new engaging opportunities for volunteers in our church parishes to be one-on-one with those people in poverty, to be one-on-one with those strangers among us, so that they can, you know, really live out their faith, so that they can see that those folks aren't really much different from themselves, and that there's a whole lot more similarities than there are differences.
Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Gustav dramatically changed the landscape as well as the people of the Diocese of Baton Rouge. Additionally, our experience with these disasters has forever altered our planning for the future.
In 2005, we were called Catholic Community Services, and we were a nice little multidisciplinary social services organization of fewer than 50 full-time employees. And we were accustomed to working after a natural disaster like a hurricane or a tropical storm and help people through the recovery process. Hurricane Katrina was an experience of a totally different magnitude. We, of course, in Baton Rouge weren't flooded with the waters the way New Orleans was and the Gulf Coast, but we were flooded by the evacuees, by the people who fled from those low-lying areas and who, unfortunately, so many of them lost everything that they had. So when they arrived, they needed everything. The storm hit on a Monday. That's when most of the damage occurred in New Orleans. By Wednesday, I think our offices had reopened, and there were 800 people at the front door in the dark that morning before I arrived. What we realized first is that people were lost, and that the most urgent need that they were expressing was how to get back together again, how to find their family members. Family reunification became really the driving objective for most of those first encounters. And of course that involved a lot of things, trying to work through the communications breakdowns that we were plagued with, helping people simply get their gas tank filled up. Or in other cases, the needs were considerably more extreme. By that day, of course, Baton Rouge had really filled up. Our population had grown by 300 or 400,000 people over the weekend, and so there were no really hotels or motels available. We understand that probably half the people in Baton Rouge sheltered people from elsewhere in Louisiana. Our agency was no different. Over half of our staff had companies staying with them. Most of us knew the people staying with us, but not all. There were many occasions of churches, parishes, families taking in people from elsewhere, whether they knew them or not. So the agency's overriding concern on day one was simply to respond to the very urgent and specific needs that were being expressed to us literally from the moment people walked in the door. That pattern really persisted for a long time. We literally had people standing in line in the dark for a couple of months, although the numbers did diminish after a while. But for the first 3 months, we would serve at least about 300 people a day. And it could have been more, but that was all the staff and volunteers that we had.
You know, we talk a lot about being prepared, being ready for the coming of Jesus, of the Son of Man. So in the church, we often talk about some kind of spiritual preparation, but Katrina and Gustav and Rita reminded us that preparation has to be more than spiritual here, that there are some other preparations that we also have to take. Our experience with Katrina and Rita and Gustav helped us to be more prepared in the sense that we recognize that there's a need for clear communication during those times, because sometimes it was very confusing as to what was going on. Is the church open? Is the church closed? What kind of services are still being offered? Not only to the priests and to Catholic laity, but also to the community at large as to what the diocese is doing. So I think one of the things that we've learned is to develop a plan to keep communication going. And of course, the second thing is to encourage not only the diocesan administrative center, but also parishes to make plans to make sure that the service will continue uninterrupted as much as possible, that safeguards are in place in terms of records. So I think we have learned a lot from those, and we have also learned how to work together with other dioceses, both to support those who may need to come to our diocese in those situations, as well as to make plans just in case we also need to go to another diocese. So there's a better sense of collaboration among dioceses in terms of that.
3 weeks after Katrina, Hurricane Rita hit over on the Texas-Louisiana border. And at that point in time, there were still thousands of Louisianans staying in shelters and the like, and unfortunately many of them were over there. So those folks who were in shelters were displaced again. We did experience a huge diaspora and lost a lot of our population, first from New Orleans and then from Southwest Louisiana. It was a complicating factor that we just could not believe we were going to have to absorb. Katrina was the worst, most expensive natural disaster we'd ever experienced in mainland America. And here 20-some days later, about the number 6th worst storm affected Louisiana. So there was a period after Rita when literally 60% of the businesses in Louisiana were closed. Our whole state took a huge hit, and naturally all of the responders, all the network of disaster responders really took a big hit too. Catholic Charities, as I was saying earlier, had typically been part of the long-term recovery process. We now became part of the early response, and that probably is one of the first big changes that we've gone through since Hurricane Katrina. There have been others. One is the pushing of services outside of our four walls and into the community. Thirdly, probably is the fact that our profile as a disaster response agency has increased dramatically.
I want to take this opportunity to express the extraordinary debt which I personally feel and the Archdiocese of New Orleans feels toward the Diocese of Baton Rouge for the way in which you responded in our hour of need. I had planned to ride out the hurricane in my own residence, using it as a base of operation to reach out and provide assistance to people. I had the directors of Catholic Charities and their staff planning to live with me. And then at the last moment, when it looked like a direct hit, we were urged by public authorities to evacuate. My first thought was to stay in the diocese and go to the Abbey. And that's where we went. We lost electricity, we lost contact with what was happening in New Orleans. All I knew was I needed to get to some place where I could set up a center of operations. Within 2 days, with the help of Bishop Muench and the leadership in the Baton Rouge Diocese, we were able to set up temporary headquarters at the Catholic Life Center. For 3.5 weeks, the leadership offices of the Baton Rouge Diocese were shared with our leadership people. That was an extraordinary sacrifice. You know, I think divine providence was involved in My having been Bishop of Baton Rouge and knowing the leadership there, Bishop Muench having been the Vicar General in the Archdiocese of New Orleans, knowing the leadership in New Orleans, preparing the way for us to come together. I continued to operate out of the Catholic Life Center for 4 months. It wasn't until the end of December of '05 that I was able to return to my residence. I was living at Our Lady of Mercy. The pastor, Father Miles Walsh, was extraordinary in what he made available to me and to Bishop Morin. That school absorbed 200 of our students. Activity Center was closed down so that we could house Red Cross workers there. There were no facilities for showers or for laundry. People of the parish took the Red Cross workers home for showers, provided food for them, did their laundry. The parish took up a significant collection. The whole Baton Rouge diocese really was extraordinary. And this station provided an opportunity for Bishop Muench and me together to appear on a daily basis in the initial weeks, and then 2 or 3 times a week as the months began to unfold, to provide an update. And so many people who were living in that area said how much they valued having those updates available to them, because they didn't know what was going on and what was happening and what was going to be possible for them in terms of return to the Archdiocese.
I cannot put into words how I felt when I saw the spontaneous response and immediate response of the people in our area, in the church, outside the church, everybody coming together to be neighbor to those who had been displaced. There was great care, there was great love, and there was great identification. And in the midst of the suffering and the loss, people held on to their faith. They knew they had a responsibility to care for those who were hurt even more than they were. And it was a time in the midst of the difficulty to be proud of the people who live here, to be proud of this church and this community. I will never forget it. What others did and how people came together, how our agencies, Catholic Charities, St. Vincent de Paul, and just people saying, what can I do? This is church alive. We didn't like the adversity, and we shouldn't have, but it gave us an opportunity to show who we were and what we were about. And this church and this community came through beyond belief. So many people were so grateful for the outreach that they experienced because they were displaced, but not only without a shelter, oftentimes without family, without friends, without their daily supplies. They were devastated. And they kept their faith. And so many people came together and helped them. I will never forget that outreach of love and service and generosity and selflessness. And I know God will never forget.
Some of the issues the church faces are unique to today's society. Other challenges are timeless. The legacy of the past serves as a firm foundation on which our graced church can deal with difficult issues faced by people today.
The great temptation I see the church having is to be cultural. And that is a great temptation, to be accepted by the culture. But to do that, sometimes you water down what your faith is, and we don't want to do that. when the church is down, that's when the Holy Spirit can really work. We get out of the Holy Spirit's way. There can be a real blossoming of the faith in the midst of all of this. And I think there will be. We shouldn't be discouraged because, I mean, after all, you read the scriptures, and the Old Testament is rife with it. The people turning away from God and thinking they can find their satisfaction in the things of the pagans and so forth, but yet God always comes in and brings them back, and He always triumphs. And I think that that's our hope.
The Diocese of Baton Rouge truly was born in the spirit of faith. This spirit guides and strengthens us today as we take on the Lord's work in our ever-changing society.
The key word for me is the Spirit. We were born out of the Second Vatican Council, which was defined as Pope John the 23rd opening the windows of the church so that the Spirit can fly through. The Spirit is elusive. That's something that we need to remember in the future, is to trust in the providence of God to carry us through. We don't know what is going to happen in the next 50 years. We don't have a map that tells us. So, born in the spirit of faith reminds us to have that faith, to trust in the Spirit of God, and He will carry us through.
The theme that we have for our anniversary celebration is Born in the Spirit of Faith, and it's all about how we came to be, who we are, and where we're going, how we got here, and what we're supposed to be and to do. It's the Holy Spirit. And the faith is allowing God to lead and to trust, to allow God to work in and through us for the sake of others.
The same Christ that was alive in the scriptures, that was going around healing people, raising people from the dead, walking on water, He's still alive today. He resurrected, and He's alive in us. And He expects us to be Him. That's what kind of spirit we have in this diocese. One of community, of union with each other, of really recognizing the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist, but also His presence in each other, and growing from that. As long as we decrease, He can increase, and so many more people can be impacted and then give their gifts to the church. We do have a lot of great things going in this diocese. I just see so many great things happening within the future, of this diocese, and I'm so happy and blessed to be a part of it, and especially to be a seminarian in this time. It's a wonderful time in the church.
One of the great blessings that I have as a priest is to celebrate with people those joyful milestones. It never ceases to amaze me as we gather for these events, the joy and the happiness. And so as we as a diocese celebrate 50 years, we celebrate all that has been passed. And we know that those celebrations offer us an opportunity to reflect back, to have those fond memories. Our history is such a part of who we are. And if we forget it, well, then we've left something of great value behind. And so as we look ahead, as we celebrate as a diocese these 50 years, we celebrate the life, we celebrate the mission, we celebrate the faith of the people, and that faith is tremendous. Our communities are fantastic places of faith and sanctuary for our people.
Born in the spirit of faith reminds us of the source of our nourishment. It's the Spirit who nourishes, it's the Spirit that brings life, it's the Spirit that heals. When we've gone through some type of catastrophe or brokenness, it's the Spirit that unites us and creates one family out of all these different individuals. The 50 years offers a unique perspective. Each bishop brings his identity, his priorities, his gifts for ministry, and he builds on those of his predecessors. Each priest celebrating the Eucharist hopefully continues on the wonderful foundation that he inherits, but also continues to offer his unique insights, his style of pastoring, his style of celebrating the Eucharist. So there's something always new, that we're always moving forward. We do want to continue to grow. This process of conversion, as we know, is lifelong.
South Louisiana is unique. It's unique in this whole country in terms of the Catholic faith. The Spanish, the French, the Creoles, the people who came in from the West Indies and so forth, brought a faith that was a mixture perhaps of Catholicism and animism, but all of that's mixed up in our faith here in South Louisiana and has given a real life to it. The Catholic culture in South Louisiana is a culture, but that it's also a faith, and it's unique. The food is unique, and the food may be an expression of the faith, because you know, other parts of the country, you don't have a great enjoyment necessarily of wine and food and good times, but down here we say, laissez le bon temps rouler. That's a Catholic statement. Let the good times roll, because we are optimists, we are people of hope, we are people of joy, we're people of love, and that's the good times. And you see it in the faith of our people. I hope we never lose that.